following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Perspectives. My name is David Schoeneman and I'm your host on this program. I'm also the alderman for Ward 3 here in Nashua. On Perspectives, we take a look at a variety of issues on a state, local, and national level in order to keep you, the viewer, informed about what your government is doing. We want you to be informed so that you can vote wisely every November when the opportunity arises. Today we're going to take a look at one of the benefits we have in our local government. That is the service that's provided by many volunteers on the various boards and commissions. Much of city work is done by boards. We've got Planning Board, we've got Zoning Board, and many others. With me today to talk about this is the chair of the Historic District Commission here in Nashua, Mr. Robert Sampson. Robert has been a lifelong resident, is a lifelong resident here in Nashua. He was born and raised in the city, has lived here his entire life, and is very well suited to this very important role as chair of the Historic District Commission. He'll tell us about the commission, what the rules and responsibilities are, and perhaps give you the opportunity at some point to contact the commission to serve yourself if you would like. Bob, thank you very much for coming in.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here. Happy to talk about the commission and life in Nashua.
And now you were born and raised here in the city of Nashua.
Yes.
What year were you born, if I may ask?
In the last months of the Hoover administration, 1932.
Well, that certainly qualifies you to chair an important commission like the Historic District Commission. How long have you been on the commission?
I think over 10 years. Bernie Streeter appointed me to the commission, and so that's 3 mayors ago now. Mm-hmm. So I won't say how many years, but I'll say 3 mayors ago.
Okay, that sounds great. So we have the Nashua Historic District Commission, but we have the Historical Society. Yeah. We've got a registry of historic places. What's the difference between all of these entities? Tell us what the Historic District Commission is.
Okay, the Historic District Commission, as you've said, is a volunteer body, but a city division or agency. The Historical Society is an independent organization of citizens who are interested in preserving the history and artifacts of Nashua's history. They own the Abbott Spaulding House at the top of Library Hill and have the Spear Museum immediately behind that, and do wonderful work, but they do not have any authority over any part of the city except the 2 buildings that they own. Mm-hmm. There is also the National Register of Historic Places, and as an example here in Nashua, what's called the National Manufacturing Company property, basically the mill yard, is in that category. And it is sometimes thought that being on the National Register will protect the property against changes that will destroy its historic character. That is not true. The register simply lists it as an interesting place that you might like to see. And it is, of course, helpful if for some reason somebody wanted to make it an actual historic district. But here in Nashua, it is not part of the district. So we have the commission, which was formed in 1980 to protect certain portions of the city against the kind of development that would have altered the character and the beauty of the neighborhood. The district, which we can look at a map in a little while, basically runs up along Concord Street, both sides of Concord Street from the Nashua River up to Greeley Park. That district was set aside actually during Mayor Donch's previous time as mayor because there was beginning to be some development along Concord Street that people were afraid was going to take it the way of South Main Street, which in my childhood or young years had a number of beautiful residents and buildings all the way along the street. And they've all disappeared, or nearly all of them, into filling stations, shopping malls, and so on. So the movement got underway to create a historic district, as I say, along Concord and Manchester streets, and it has been that way ever since. It certainly is possible to have other areas of the city made a historic district, even individual buildings. And that's something that perhaps we want to talk about a little later on.
We'll certainly get to that part of the conversation a little bit later on in the program. But the idea behind the historic district then is to preserve and protect against what could be considered unwanted development.
Yes.
A gas station in place of a Victorian house would be deemed, I think, unwanted development. Even if the Victorian house maybe is in a little bit of a disrepair, it might be more worth it to the city, to the aesthetic character of the city, to have someone rebuild that building rather than knock it down and put up a gas station.
Exactly, and that indeed was one of the triggers. The filling station at the corner of Orange Street was put up and caused a lot of people to say, wait a minute, we don't want a filling station right on Concord Street. And then, but that was before there was a commission. Then the Stark House, which is in the corner of Manchester and Concord Street, was proposed for demolition with, I've forgotten what, but something to go in there. And that got people going, and the result is the district that we have today. Now, I should add that the properties that are protected don't have to be Victorian mansions or anything. Certainly on Concord Street, there are some houses built within the last 40 or 50 years, probably more recently than that. And so they don't have to be ancient. They don't necessarily have to be beautiful, but they do establish the character of a neighborhood, and that's what the ordinance attempts to protect and what the commission is charged with doing in terms of hearing people's requests for any changes or improvements that they want to make. I've mentioned improvements. It's important that everyone understand the commission is not going to keep you from repairing your roof or painting the house or any of the things that would constitute ordinary maintenance and repairs. We can't even tell you what color to paint your building. But what we can do is keep people from converting it, as you just said, into a filling station, or tearing it down and building a condominium, or doing other things that would make the neighborhood less attractive to the people who already live there and would like to continue to live in the neighborhood they chose when they bought their property.
And I think it provides a very valuable service to folks. I don't live in the district, but I live near the district, and I'm very glad to have those kinds of protections. I think when people think about something like a historic district commission, the first thought that comes to my mind, if anyone lives anywhere in this area, would be something like Lexington Green in Massachusetts. And we hear stories about Lexington Green where you cannot paint your house. You must have black shutters. And it seems like a very bureaucratic nightmare to go through to really do anything of regular maintenance on your house, because the whole idea is to preserve it. And sometimes it feels like you want to preserve it in a condition that's less than useful. But that's not the case here in Nashua.
Not at all.
Not at all. So if someone wants to paint their house, the neighbors may not like it. We might say, well, gee, we don't really like purple at that corner. But if the owners do, the Historic District Commission has no say over the color of paint, no say over the color of the roof.
And also, I would add, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay.
We don't have anything to say about what you do on the interior, which is important. If you want to add a bathroom or take out a bathroom or paint your walls purple, fine, go ahead and do it. Sure. All we're concerned about is the external appearance of your property, which could be a house. It could be you might want to add, for instance, a garage or change your garage. Okay, we're not going to stop you from having a garage as long as it fits the character of the neighborhood.
Right.
So we have done that now for several years, I hope and think with considerable success.
I think with considerable success. It's important to consider what the neighborhood looks like and what it might have become. My brother lives out in the Midwest, in Chicago area, and he lives in a town that has a lot of historic character, but there's no historic district commission there. And as a result, being a suburb of Chicago, a nearby suburb of Chicago, with modest homes that were built 50 to 100 years ago, we're finding a lot of those homes are being torn down and new, much larger, the so-called McMansions, are going up. And it completely changes the character. And we haven't seen that kind of thing, but it could happen. A lot that might be 2 or 3 acres, very sort of pastoral type setting, very pretty, could be subdivided here in Nashua, and acres could be sold off, and 2 or 3 new homes could be built. And so not only does the character change by the style, but it changes by the density.
Absolutely.
And so the Historic District Commission then has a role in approving those before they can go forward. And the Historic District Commission, in my experience, as an alderman and as a member on that commission, in my aldermanic role, I see that people come in, neighbors come in, and they testify about a project, proposed project, and the comments and opinions that neighbors have bears very heavily on what the Historic Commission ultimately decides.
It certainly does, because if a neighborhood strenuously objects to something and feels that that's going to change, again, as you say, the character of the neighborhood, then we will support them in that. It's not, we're not sitting there as describing, imposing rules
Right.
on people in the city. There are so many lovely places all along Concord and Manchester streets. And as I've said earlier, not all of them are antiques, Victorian.
Right.
Some of them are relatively new. One of the things that maybe we can talk about is whether the district could or should be expanded to include some other areas of the city. And perhaps you'd like to say something about that.
Sure. Well, let's move on to that. Let's take a look at a map of the district as we move into that conversation. This is a map of the north end of Nashua. We can see the Nashua River down here. We've got Main Street that comes down this way, proceeds off the southern end of the map. This light green section here in the middle is the current historic district. And we can see Concord Street right here, heading up towards Greeley Park, is shown up here on the yellow portion. We'll talk a little bit more about the yellow portion in just a moment. But the homes that face Concord Street are in the district. And of course, there's some homes down here too that are in the district as well. It basically comes from the east side of Holman Stadium out here to Railroad Square area and then up Concord Street. And it's been this way since about 1980.
That's when the district was established and the commission was established. And so there are many other parts of the city, homes and structures in the city that might well qualify to be part of a historic district. And there has been some recent discussion about expanding the district, as the map shows, to include Greeley Park, Swat Terrace, going eastward beyond Concord Street to include Berkeley Street and perhaps Chester Street. Nothing is cast in concrete about any of this. These are simply things that are being discussed, and for all of that to happen, or some of it to happen, would of course require an amendment to the ordinance approved by the Board of Aldermen and the mayor, and I think would not happen if a large proportion of the people involved said, this is a terrible idea, we don't want it, don't like it, won't have it.
Right.
Marched on City Hall and so forth.
Again, this is a body that is trying to be responsive to the requests of residents. And so we're not looking to impose, we're looking to help.
Yeah.
And I think in a very genuine way. Again, we're volunteers. We're not city employees. We're volunteers. We're neighbors who live in the area.
Yeah.
And some of these folks who live in areas that are not part of the district have approached members of government and said, local government, is it possible to expand historic district to include my neighborhood as well? So this is based on a request that came from some folks who said, my neighbor has a few acres, as a hypothetical example. I don't want to see that subdeveloped, but it would meet the zoning requirements, but it would change the character and it could affect the value of my house. Can my neighborhood be in the historic district as well?
And I can give you an example of where that exact thing has happened. Just outside of the historic district, the what's called the Duck Pond House, that is to say the mansion, probably still the biggest house in Nashua, at the corner of Berkeley and Beeson Street, with the little pond behind it. There was a proposal a while back to fill in the pond and develop that lot. And although that's not in the district, as I understand it, the neighbors objected so strenuously that the plan was dropped. And just as a piece of trivial history, that whole section of the north end was once the Layton farm, and that pond was the piggery pond. So, although
this is why it's good that you're on the historic district and the chair of the commission.
So it's become Duck Pond rather than Piggery Pond, and that house is just the crown jewel of the north end of Nashua. It was built in the early 1900s by a man named Frank Stevens, who was the refrigerator king of North America. His main manufacturing company was the largest ice refrigerator manufacturer in the entire world.
Wow.
So it has that aspect of history as well as being an extremely interesting house. And the house immediately adjacent to it, a brick house, which was built in probably 1937 by one of Frank Stevens' sons, is also a beautiful piece of property. And that's not to say that all the way along Berkeley and, for that matter, Chester Street, there aren't equally interesting properties. Sure. Chester Street, for example, further towards town, there are a number of brick houses that are an interesting development in that they were built, I believe, by the Nashua Gummed and Coated Paper Company, later the Nashua Corporation, as homes for company executives. And of course, they now, the Gummed and Coated Paper Company, Nashua Corporation, is long gone.
Sure.
But it's an interesting development by a company for their executives. So again, an area that has some interesting qualifications.
I know someone who lives in one of those houses. I've never been inside, but they look to be a relatively small footprint.
Most of them are, yeah.
They're tiny, tiny homes, but they're on very nice pieces of property, and they're in a very pretty part of town. And as pretty as they are small, and they could be ripe for someone to come in, tear them down, and put up something a little more modern, a McMansion-style home. And in order to prevent that from happening, because there is a historical aspect to those homes, and although they are small, they're very cozy looking, and they add a lot to the neighborhood. So I think the neighbors, not wanting to see that kind of thing happen to those homes, have approached the commission and would say, as an example, can our street be included?
Right. And I hope that anyone who hears us today and lives in any of those areas and is interested will let us know.
Absolutely.
I'd be happy to hear from people. I'm sure you would be.
Of course.
So you can reach the commission through the planning office at the City Hall. And for that matter, I'll go way out on a limb. My phone number is 882-0634. And I hope the phone isn't ringing off the hook, but in some ways I hope it will.
Sure. We want to hear from folks. That's
Absolutely
the whole idea.
do.
That's a big part of government, like I said in the opening part of the show here in Nashua, is that we have a lot of volunteer boards and commissions. These are folks who step up to serve in a way that benefits the city and is very satisfying at the same time. And we want to hear what people have to say, because this is self-government at its best, really, because this is not
Absolutely is.
paid government. This is volunteer folks who step up to serve.
Well, I've urged the city to double the pay of the Historic District Commission. Since we get 0 and twice 0 is still 0, the city can easily double our pay.
That's right, no tax increase implied.
No tax increase on that one.
That's right. So we do hope that people reach out and comment on this. I had a ward meeting a few weeks ago. You
I
attended.
was there, yeah.
Most of the members of the Historic District Commission were there, and we heard from folks in the area, some in favor and some questioning, some not so sure about whether they really wanted their neighborhood to be in. But one of the attendees had a very good comment. One of the neighbors, she said that the commission doesn't exist to deal with the day-to-day. I think a lot of people when they hear historic district, once again, they think about something like Lexington Green, where you cannot do anything to your home. And of course, we said that's not the case. So she said that it doesn't deal with the day-to-day things that you want to do, which could include roof repair and paint or that kind of thing. But we deal with things that are the once every 10 to 15 years occurrences, where somebody wants to come in with a grand idea to tear that little house down and let's put up something that they think might be nicer or more modern or more whatever. And while people do own their property, and we always want people to be able to do with their property what they want, that's part of being in America too. There is some consideration, and Historic District Commission allows there to be consideration for the aesthetic effect that a new development like that would have. And we give the folks in the neighborhood a voice.
We certainly do. Every proposal that comes before the commission is notified to the abutters in advance. They have the opportunity to come in and state their opinion, pro or con, and we do hear from them. And I might add that we're not opposed to technology. We fairly recently approved solar panels.
Yes, we did.
Actually in the backyard, not on the roof, because some houses don't have roofs that lend themselves to that. But we did approve that. And the example that I've often used is that if we were adamant on a historic district, we would insist trolley cars be reinstated on Concord Street. I don't think we'll ever go that far.
No, probably not. I would kind of like it, though. I like the old stuff. But you're right about the solar panel. Solar panels, modern technology. It's in the backyard. The original proposal was rejected.
That's right.
The original proposal had the solar panels protruding above the 6-foot fence line by about 7 or 8 feet, if I recall correctly. So it was roughly twice the height of the fence, and it would have been visible from the ground in neighbors' yards or on the street. So an alternate proposal came forward where the solar panel array was tipped back so that the high point stayed below the 6-foot fence line. And while neighbors can see it from a second floor window, no one can see it from the street. And going down Concord Street, you would never know. There's really a very large, I think it's like 30 feet by 60 feet, 60 feet long, solar array in a backyard there, but because you don't see it, thanks to the Historic District Commission.
Right. So that, again, that's the kind of thing that we do consider. As you say, we didn't approve the initial request, but subsequently said, hey, this is new technology. We'll go for it. We have also considered, and interesting enough, the city when they want to do something different, has to come before us. There are the so-called bump outs on Concord Street and Manchester Street, which changed the curb line to make for better crosswalks for school children, and the city had to get the commission's approval on things like that. So that would be applied, for instance, in the proposed expansion, Greeley Park. We would be able to, if it was included, have some say about putting up new structures there. And I know that from time to time there are proposals. I can remember back far enough when somebody wanted to build a new high school there.
Oh, wow.
That was a long time ago.
Yes, well, I'm glad that didn't happen.
Yeah. But those are the kind of things that we're interested in. And again, I emphasize that nothing that we're talking about here is decided upon. We want to hear from people. There would obviously be a proposal, perhaps from the commission. There would certainly be aldermanic hearings.
Yep.
And there would be plenty of opportunity for people who say this is a great idea or no, it's the worst thing that ever was.
Right.
And for that matter, come in and say, I'll just take a totally off the cuff example. Why isn't the mill yard a historic district? That has been suggested at various times and probably isn't a bad idea, but that's not the proposal that we're looking at right now.
The proposal that we're looking at now shows a proposed expanded area in yellow on that map.
Right.
And that included Berkeley and Chester Streets, Swart Terrace, and Olive Greeley Park.
Right.
And again, those are just a proposal for discussion purposes, and I suspect that if anything ever goes forward, those boundaries will be somewhat changed.
Right.
But that's where we're at right now today as we're taping this.
Yeah.
Before we get too much further in here, we don't have too much time left. What triggers having to come before the Historic District Commission?
That's a good question.
In the area.
If you're going to do something that requires a building permit, and the building permit is for a structure in the historic district, that automatically triggers an appearance before the historic district. You don't get your building permit until you've come before the commission and explained in considerable detail what it is you're proposing to do. We don't want people just to come in and say, well, I'm going to rebuild my porch. Thank you very much. Go ahead and do it. Right. We want to see the plans, the materials, what it is exactly you're going to do. Because although we have great trust in the citizens of Nashua, as who was it said, trust but verify.
Yes, I think it was Reagan.
President Reagan, exactly so. And we follow that principle.
Well, I think it's a good one to follow. So it has to, the proposed project has to require a building permit.
Yeah.
And it has to affect the exterior, because there are building
Yes.
permits required for interior
Absolutely.
work. But again, interior
don't
design
touch it.
changes doesn't come to the Historic District Commission. Just exterior that requires a building permit.
Right.
Good. Well, Bob, we're nearly out of time here. I mentioned at the beginning that this is a volunteer board. Now, do we sometimes have difficulty filling these seats?
Yes.
There are alternates, and what can someone do if they want to get involved?
Tell the mayor that you'd like to be appointed, and we do have some vacancies right now for alternates. I believe we should have 3 alternates. We have 1.
Okay.
And so there are 2 openings for anybody who's interested, and we'd love to hear from you and have you join the Nashua Historic District Commission.
Thank you very much, Bob. And thank you folks, too, for tuning in. We're always glad to have you watching Perspectives and learning about your government on the various levels. I'm here with Robert Sampson today, who is the chair of the Historic District Commission here in Nashua. My name is David Schoeneman. I'm your host. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to us by email at perspectivesnh@gmail.com, perspectivesnh@gmail.com. Thank you once again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.